Every child rebels a little, but sometimes you can take it too far. Welcome to American Esoterica. If history class gives you the chicken tenders, this is the honey mustard dipping sauce. The essential stuff in between. The personalities, events, and other ephemera that shape our history and culture. I'm Brian Powers. It's a cliche to refer to the Civil War as one of brother against brother, but any fight between factions of the same country or region will necessarily see families torn asunder. While we may find ourselves at odds with our fellow countrymen a little more than usual in these polarized times, we still can't hold a candle to the American experience during and long after the Civil War. For one thing, we're not engaged in an actual shooting war, unlike, for example, the Crittenden family. From Russellville, Kentucky, near the border with Tennessee, they saw two sons become generals of the opposing armies. And it's likely a pretty solid metaphor for how close to the Confederate border they were that the brothers split right down the middle. Luckily for the Crittenden brothers, they both survived the war and returned to Kentucky, where their father was governor, and they became the state treasurer and state librarian. Other families, however, were not so lucky, including the First family. 4 of Mary Todd Lincoln's brothers joined the Confederacy, with one of them and a brother-in-law dying in battle for the cause. It was during the Battle of Malvern Hill on July 1, 1862, that a genuine family tragedy played out. Before we get there, let's stop and recall the fake story about the origins of the song Taps. Supposedly, a Union soldier, upon hearing the sounds of a gravely wounded man dying out on a battlefield, risked life and limb to pull the man to safety, only to find that the man had died while he did so, he was a soldier for the opposing side, and the man was his very own son, who he didn't know had joined the Confederacy. The story goes on about how the dead soldier had a scrap of paper in his pocket upon which he had written a short, mournful tune that we now know as Taps. That story is, as mentioned in the episode that featured it, not true. There's a real story that may have inspired it, however. And if you thought the Taps story was heartbreaking, you may need to skip the rest of this episode. The Battle of Malvern Hill was the last battle of the so-called 7 Days Battles. It shook out like this. General George McClellan thought that he could capture the Confederate capital of Richmond through sneaking by sea around to the Virginia Peninsula about 80 miles to the southeast of the city and fighting his way up to it with about 121,000 of his closest friends. The Peninsula Campaign, as it was called, had worked somewhat, but an early misstep had bogged the Union Army down outside of Yorktown for a month or so. By this time, the commander of the Confederate Army, General Johnston, had been severely wounded, so he was replaced by a brash upstart who would later serve as the inspiration for a TV show car, General Robert E. Lee. Under Lee's command, the rebels pushed back against the Army of the Potomac, which had been a bit too successful in the Peninsula Campaign and now found itself just outside the Confederate capital. For a solid week, the Union Army was thwarted at every attempt to reach Richmond, although it did come pretty close, just a handful of miles away early on. At the end of the week, as the Union Army kept pulling back and charging back toward the city like a bug trying to find a way out of your car through the windshield, the exhausted armies met one last time, just over a mile away from the James River in a spot called Malvern Hill. Frustrated that he hadn't yet beaten the Federal troops down, Lee brought his forces to Malvern Hill, only to discover that McClellan's forces had already taken the high ground. Wave after wave of Confederate soldiers tried to take the hill, but all stopped short at its base, stymied by the massive line of Union artillery at the top. Ultimately, the battle was kind of a draw. The Union Army repelled Lee's Confederates, so it was a technical victory for the North, but it was clear to McClellan that he would never be able to take Richmond, so it was the end of the Peninsula Campaign. It's in this setting where we meet Captain David Power Conyngham, a member of the Irish Brigade, several regiments comprising Irish immigrants as soldiers. Captain Conyngham came over from Ireland just prior to the start of the war and served as a war correspondent before joining the Irish Brigade as a soldier. In his detailed account of the actions of the brigade, the Irish Brigade and its campaigns, he relayed the story told mournfully by another soldier. And here, I'll let him tell it. I had a Sergeant Driscoll, a brave man and one of the best shots in the brigade. When charging at Malvern Hill, a company was spotted in a clump of trees who kept up a fierce fire on us and actually charged out on our advance. Their officer seemed to be a daring, reckless boy, and I said to Driscoll, if that officer is not taken down, many of us will fall before we pass that clump. Leave that to me, said Driscoll. So he raised his rifle, and the moment the officer exposed himself again, bang went Driscoll, and over went the officer, his company at once breaking away. As we passed the place, I said, Driscoll, see if that officer is dead. He was a brave fellow. I stood looking on. Driscoll turned him over on his back. He opened his eyes for a moment and faintly murmured, Father, and closed them forever. I will forever recollect the frantic grief of Driscoll. It was harrowing to witness. He was his son, who had gone south before the war. Another soldier in the camp asked him what became of Driscoll, and he responded, well, we were ordered to charge, and I left him there. But as we were closing in on the enemy, he rushed up with his coat off and, clutching his musket, charged right up at the enemy, calling on the men to follow. He soon fell but jumped up again. We knew he was wounded. On he dashed, but he soon rolled over like a top. When we came up, he was dead, riddled with bullets. I kind of wish the story weren't the true one. This has been American Esoterica. All sounds were made by me, Brian Powers. Did I get it wrong? Did I get it right? Just want to talk about how the Irish Brigade, made up mostly of immigrants, was in the top 3 brigades to shed the most blood for the United States in the Civil War? Drop me a note. The address is yell@americanesoterica.com. More information on the show can be found at americanesoterica.com. Thank you for listening, and God bless America.